Welcome back, GameDaySportsRadio.com. Early Sunday morning, and always Mike Bernard from OTM Sports joins us here on Game Day Sports Radio. Hey, it looks like we dressed alike today for some reason, Mike.
Yeah, I see we both got the memo.
Yeah, got the memo. Yeah, corporate's coming down on us, not following the dress code, so we're towing the company line now. Well, let's get right into it, Mike. Yesterday was probably as entertaining weekend of college football that I've watched as a fan. Of course, I'm sure there probably were weekends like this when I was coaching that I didn't get to sit and watch a lot of games. But Clemson, Florida State, Clemson gets by the Seminoles 34-21. Kentucky, and it's a little bit of a surprise to me, beats Mississippi State 27-17. LSU goes into the swamp and wins 45-35. Ole Miss over Auburn 48-34 in a game where Auburn got down and clawed their way back into it. Very questionable call, in my opinion, kept that from being a tie game at halftime. And after the Red River shootout, Oklahoma comes back and redeems themselves, scores 52 points after being shut out last week. They get by Kansas 52-42. And then Texas, as we kind of expected, they would have a little bit of a letdown after that 49 shellacking of the Sooners last week. And they squeaked by Iowa State 24-21. TCU stays undefeated for one more week, defeats in double overtime the Cowboys of Oklahoma State 43-40. And then got to give it to Brett Bielema, Illinois, 6-1, their best start in 12 seasons. They beat Minnesota 26-14. And then, speaking of best starts, at 6-0, their best start since 1987. Syracuse beats North Carolina State 24-9. And then last night, in a very fun game to watch, two basketball schools, North Carolina and Duke, got after it. And North Carolina scores late with about 15 seconds to go, wins 38-35. Again, just some of the games that I got to watch, and I thought they were all fun to watch. I know that your schedule is a lot different than mine on the weekends. But any thoughts on any of those games before we get into our featured games?
Well, Coach, of those 10 games, underdogs were 2-8 straight up, but they were 8-2 against the spread. The built-in value is on the underdogs due to the inflated lines. Some other notes I take from those games: Clemson, they're still the king of the ACC. Sure, they didn't win it last year, but they're still the king in my mind. Syracuse, 6 wins, no losses. That matches that 1987 team that went 11-0-1. The one blemish was that tie with Auburn in the Sugar Bowl. 1987, Coach, a great year for the Orange. Their football team finished 11-0-1, and the men's basketball team made it to the Final Four, and they lost by they just fell short in the title game to Bobby Knight's Hoosiers on the last second shot by Keith Smart.
I remember that. I sure do. Down the Superdome, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, which is a hard place to shoot.
Yes. Let's go into our first game from yesterday, the only blowout of our featured games. Michigan 41, Penn State 17. The Wolverines dominated this game from start to finish. However, they stalled in the red zone in the first half and only led 16-14 at half. Come out, though, they fall behind 17-16, then 25 unanswered points. This is how bad things were for Penn State yesterday. Their quarterback, Sean Clifford, who I think at 61 years old, I could probably stay neck and neck in a foot race with, he was the Lions' leading rusher with 74 yards, and 62 of those came on a touchdown jaunt that caught not only the Wolverine defense, but everybody in the country off guard. On the flip side of that coin, Michigan, 418 yards rushing. They had 2 running backs go over 150 yards. Donovan Edwards, 173 yards, a couple of touchdowns, and including in that was a 67-yard touchdown run. And then Blake Corum, 166 yards. He had 2 TDs, and another one of his TDs was a long 61-yard touchdown run. The Michigan defense, they held Penn State to 268 yards. Shut them down, basically.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you and I started doing radio and TV together 7 years ago, and it was based off the concept of handicapper versus coach. And one of the things we found that transcends different sports, but especially for football, is the things that we agree on is stopping the run, running the ball, even in this day and age of supersonic offenses. But Coach, so as a handicapper, the one thing that's glaring, I watched that game and it was on one of the big screens in the office. 418 yards rushing. I mean, that was old school dominance. But listen, before the fans in Ann Arbor get too excited, they still have to beat Ohio State, and that'll be for the second time in a row. And they haven't had great success against the Buckeyes in that. And then they'll still have to win the title game. And remember, as good as they look now, they also looked this good last year. And we remember what happened in that semifinal game. But hey, it was a great win. They have an easy schedule coming up, leading up to that big game. But I say easy schedule, but Sparty has given them trouble. And as you mentioned earlier, Bielema's Illini team, they look much improved as well.
Yeah, it's almost like with Michigan. Every season, you look on the schedule when you want to say, "Hey, they're for real this time," and you look on the schedule and you say, even taking Ohio State into consideration, there's usually still another game that gives them a hiccup.
Yeah, and look, I'm not disparaging these teams. You have elite teams, which are the top 10 or 12 teams out of 130 plus. Then you have the super elite teams. And so far, we've seen that Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Michigan, they're elite teams, but they're not super elite once they get to the Final Four.
I think we're going to find out, to talk about elite and super elite. I think that we had two elite teams play in Knoxville yesterday. One has been super elite for a long time, but Tennessee may be in that Michigan file. Are they or aren't they right now? But they got by the Tide yesterday for the first time in 15 years, 52-49. This was a classic matchup. Alabama gave up the most points that they've given up since 1907, and it was to another Tennessee team, Swanee, back when they were in the old Southern Conference that was the precursor to the Southeastern Conference. We all expected that Bryce Young may not play and Cedric Tillman, that he would play for the Vols, but Young suits up for Alabama. I don't think there was.
Coach,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I'm just telling, just for the viewers, do not trust these injury reports. As a handicapper, it's maddening because, I mean, from what we were told and what we could discern is that Bryce Young would maybe play but not be 100%, and that Tillman would play. So to your point, be very careful before you make your decisions on these injury reports.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if Bryce Young wasn't 100% yesterday, man, I would hate to see him. I would hate to see him at 100%. I think he may, now again, it was a loss, but I think he may have played overall the best game that I've seen him play at Alabama.
Yeah, look, hey, Coach, what he did, he made plays that I haven't seen since Michael Vick when he was at Virginia Tech. I mean, the kid looks like a point guard on the field, and the way he makes people miss, elite defenders miss, it's quite incredible.
Early on, Tennessee jumps out to that 21-7 lead. Bama fought back to tie it up 28-28, and it was just a back-and-forth game until Chase McGrath hit that 40-yard walk-off field goal that was the ugliest field goal that I've ever seen win a football game. It was nasty. I believe it was tipped, but I'm not sure. But it did not – when it left his foot and I saw it floating, I didn't think it was going to make it.
No, I didn't either, and it didn't make it by much, but it made it by just enough to get the win.
Yes. We talked about Bryce Young, Hendon Hooker too. 21 for 30, 385 and 5 TDs. And then, of course, Bryce Young, 35 for 52, 455 yards for 2 touchdowns. And of course, we talked about the plays on 3rd and long that he saved, that Bryce Young saved. But Hendon Hooker, I've said this all year, I just don't think that he's getting the recognition and the respect that he deserves. Maybe he will now after that game. But I have a hard time looking back and saying, when were there 2 better college quarterbacks on the same field?
You know, you and I do a pretty good job of not getting into the hyperbolic, transcend eras and things. And there may have been a case, but we can think back to Alabama Clemson matchups. You had Watson, you had Tua, you had Jalen Hurts, and you had Trevor Lawrence. But in those matchups of recent memory, I don't think both, like for instance, when Trevor Lawrence and Clemson beat Alabama, Tua didn't have a good game. But these quarterbacks both showed, had great performances. And Hendon Hooker, his odds to win the Heisman just improved greatly in a losing effort. Again, like I saw Bryce Young make plays that you just don't normally see. He might, as a college quarterback, he might be like a Michael Vick, a Vince Young, a Tim Tebow. Now, those guys didn't turn out to be great NFL quarterbacks. They were almost impossible to stop in college.
Yeah, listen, Bryce Young, he's listed. I think they list him at 6 foot. If he's
5'10".
if he's 6 foot, I'm 6'5", because he is just not that big. But it goes back to Doug Flutie. Doug Flutie was probably 5'8". He won the Heisman, and because he made plays. He was a player. He was a baller, as they say. And Bryce Young is the same way. And again, I don't know how his skills are going to translate into the quarterback position in the NFL. But again, as far as from a college standpoint, there's no one that I've ever seen I'd rather have under center than Bryce Young, because he can beat you with his arms. He can beat you with his legs. He can beat you with his smarts. He's a very intelligent young man. And the things that he does, his vision as he's moving, as he's buying himself time, is just unbelievable. When he stepped up in the pocket the other day and was being chased, and I forgot who he hit on the little it was a release route, and the back had gone out.
Number 10?
Yes, and nothing.
JoJo Earl, yeah.
Yeah, nothing was there, and he turns up the sideline as he's coached to do, and Bryce Young hit him in stride. I mean, that may have been the most impressive play that he made all day to me from a coaching standpoint.
Right. And here's the thing, the fans, short for fanatics, right? They're going to say what they say and think what they want to think. But the bottom line in this game is that Bryce Young drove his team down to get in field goal position. The Alabama kicker missed. Hendon Hooker drove his team down to get in field goal position. His kicker made. And it's not to knock the kickers. That's just part of football. Tennessee was a 9-point dog. The game sailed over the total. You talked about Alabama giving up 52 points. Now, it's not likely, Coach, but if Alabama wins out and Tennessee wins out and gets to Atlanta, we have a situation where we could see Alabama and Tennessee play 3 times in a season. But of course, just like the speed bump I put in front of Michigan, before you get there's some Bulldogs in Athens that are going to have a lot to say about that, and they play on November 5th.
Okay, Mike, let's play what if. What if Georgia beats Tennessee in a very close game, a 1-score game, and then Tennessee runs the table the rest of the way? They're 11-1 at the end of the regular season, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do they get to Atlanta? Well, let's say this. Let me make sure I set the table correctly. Georgia beats Tennessee and runs the table, and then Tennessee's 11-1, and Georgia hasn't lost, so Tennessee can't get to Atlanta. Georgia's got to go, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And let's just say that Alabama goes and Alabama beats Georgia. Now you've got a possibility that there will be 3 SEC teams, or if Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC championship game, then you've got a situation where Tennessee, much like Alabama, slipped in and played, had a rematch with LSU for the national championship back in 11 or the 11th season, where Tennessee doesn't even have to play in the SEC championship game, but with 4 teams now could still get into the playoffs.
Yeah, yeah, that could happen. And look, the Clemson fatigue, the SEC fatigue, it's at all-time high, and it's been that way for a while. Let that happen and see how tired people are of the SEC.
Yeah. Well, speaking of fatigue, the Pac-12, they have fatigue because they can't get anyone in the playoffs. Everyone was looking at USC as maybe they were the team to get back in and make some noise from the Pac-12 in the college football playoff. And we talked about all week about that Rice-Eccles environment and that nighttime magic. Well, it worked again. Utah 43, USC 42. The first time that the Utes have won back-to-back over the Trojans since 1915 and 1916. I'm going to be honest with you, Mike. I didn't even know that schools out west were playing football that early. Let's look at Caleb Williams, the Trojans quarterback, the transfer from Oklahoma. 25-42, 381 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's going to be good enough to win 9 times out of 10. But
Sure.
you look at the Ute quarterback, Cam Rising, and he was a Southern California product. A lot of people don't remember that. He was right up the road from LA in Ventura County. He wanted to go to USC, could not get any interest, ends up at Texas. And then last night he shows out against his former hometown team, 30 of 44, 415 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was also the Utes' leading rusher with 60 yards, had 3 touchdowns. More importantly, he ran in the 2-point conversion after the TD run with 32 seconds left to give the Utes the lead. This is one of those rare cases when 2 good teams play and it's a tight game, and the team that lost the turnover battle wins the game. I think what offset that a little bit with those 12 penalties that USC had.
Yeah, Coach. And USC, they were a public dog, simply meaning that a lot of the public's betting USC. They're undefeated. Utah had 2 losses. They lose outright, but they do get the cover. And most of the time, those public dogs don't fare that well. The game goes over the total. You talked about the penalties. USC and Alabama share gold medal for penalties. In both big games on the road, it's likely that penalties cost both teams. Quarterbacks in this game, we talked about the Alabama-Tennessee that had outstanding quarterback play. And for those that don't like the transfer rules, it's fair to point out that Hooker at Tennessee, Rising at Utah, Williams at SC, they're all transfers. And remember, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, many others, but those 2 particularly are now in the NFL, so they're pros and cons with the transfer rule, because who wants to see Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields on the sitting on the bench? At least they went somewhere and contributed, and now they're both in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. And they're playing well in the NFL also. Let's just say that.
Well, at least Hurts is. Fields is struggling a bit.
Yeah, Fields is struggling, yes. But I look at it this way. If you're one of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, you're doing something right, because you're one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the world. But let's take it a step further. We always talk about coaches and the fit that they have for their institutions. And a lot of times you had great quarterbacks that got into systems that did not fit them. And it may be because of a change in offense. It just wasn't, for whatever reason, it just wasn't a good fit. And they're able to go on, transfer, and really make best use of their talents. What do you think do you think that we would have ever heard of Larry Bird had he stayed at Indiana for his entire career rather than leaving and going to Indiana State?
Right. Well, and then staying with football, Troy Aikman, people forget, he started at Oklahoma. And
Correct.
we probably wouldn't have heard of Troy Aikman because he can't run the wishbone, or he couldn't back then even. So, he was told, hey, yeah, we're going to pass it. We're going to pass it. And he realized, hey, they're not going to pass it. And then he went to UCLA and became a Hall of Famer.
Barry Switzer always said the best thing that ever happened to Troy Aikman was he broke his leg against Miami. He said, because as long as he was on campus, I was going to play him. And after he broke his leg in that Miami game, and Oklahoma goes ahead and wins the national championship with Jamel Holloway coming in at quarterback, a freshman coming in at quarterback. And of course, Aikman transfers to UCLA, and the rest is history for that guy. All right, moving on to our free picks of the week this past week, or your free picks of the week. All my picks are free. You had BYU and with Arkansas, yeah, and I have to say on all our other shows when I had to pick whether a guest picker or on the Crazy Eight Challenge on GameDaySportsRadio.com, I had Arkansas, but you're still 4-2 on the year. Not to brag, but I got the best of you this week. I thought the Tigers of LSU would go into the swamp and play well, and Florida was 2.5-point favorites, and we're still in good shape. You're 4-2 on the year. I'm 5-1 on the year.
Yep. So the listeners, if they're playing our picks, they're doing very well. So 9-3. Contrary to what the scam artists say out there in Twitter world and about how they're 10-0 and things, that's not reality. 9-3 is outstanding. Brigham Young was just a good spot, I thought, for Arkansas. But sometimes there's teams overcome spots because Arkansas had been in 3 grueling games, go all the way out to play an interconference game, and it was close for a while. But then I think the SEC schedule really just kind of prepared them for that comeback, and then they won going away. Coach, I've noticed with your free picks, you're playing a lot of underdogs. Not only are they covering, but they're winning outright. So kudos to you.
All right, let's move on to this coming week. We're going to have a battle for the Atlantic Division lead in the ACC. Syracuse going to Clemson. Texas at Oklahoma State. I think this is we talk about tipping point games for the season. I think this is one for both Texas and Oklahoma State. Texas is obviously feels real good after Red River Shootout. They were emotionally drained. They came back and got by Iowa State, did what they needed to do. They're going to have to play a lot better against a wounded Oklahoma State team this coming week. Ole Miss and LSU in the Magnolia Bowl, unless you're – I don't even want to say from the South. There's a lot of people that just don't know how intense this rivalry is, and it goes back decades, all the way back to Billy Cannon's midnight run back in the 50s when Burt Jones was playing for LSU, and LSU got off like 3 plays in 5 seconds inside the 5 to win the game. Hometown clock operator probably helped
like the 1972 Olympics.
Exactly, same type deal. And then Kansas State at TCU, they're both 3-0 in the Big 12, except for a weird loss to Tulane, which I did not expect Kansas State to lose to Tulane back in I believe the second week of the season. Both these teams will be undefeated, but this is going to be a good game to watch. But the one that jumps out to me is out in the Big 12, UCLA and Oregon. And after the rankings come out a little bit later on this morning, this could very easily be a top 10 matchup.
Yeah, well, quick thoughts on these games you just mentioned. The Orange faced their first true test. Oklahoma State, they need a mental reset because they blew that 14-point lead at TCU in the fourth quarter. Rebels, they're walking into a trap scenario. They're 1-9 their last 10 trips to Baton Rouge, 0-6 since 2008. And we still need 2 wins from LSU to get over the season wins total because we bet them over. TCU, they're riding high off a comeback win. K-State, they thrive in these spots. They play when they go against a team that's coming in off an emotional high. They usually take advantage. Bruins and Ducks, only unbeatens left in the Pac-12. And remember, the Pac-12 no longer has North and South divisions. The top two conference records will play in the title game. And Coach, every week on Inside the Numbers, we break down 3 marquee games and then give our free picks on Inside the Numbers every Friday. You mentioned those 5 games. We're going to have to cut it down to 3. So how about the viewers decide in the comments?
Hey, we've got no problem with that at all. We encourage all of our viewers to send in what your picks will be. Hey, even if it's a game that we haven't got listed, we'll consider it. I mean, we'll look at it and see if we need to put it up there. No doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll between these 5 games, we need to cut it down to 3. And so maybe people can help us cut that down to 3 games.
We can do that. And we want to remind all our viewers to be sure and subscribe to the channel and share our content. And again, comment on our information. We have pretty thick skin from your years as a handicapper and my years as a coach. The only thing is I know that you have to face words, but I don't think you've really lived until you've run out of a tunnel and had batteries or small whiskey bottles. That's how that works. But anyway, Mike, we appreciate your time. And of course, we're going to have you back in about an hour. We're going to review or preview tonight's NFL game. So we'll get you back on in about an hour.
Sounds good. See you then, Coach.